Hello everyone. We are waiting for Bruce Dickey to join us today on our series of A Coffee With.
This afternoon,
Hi, Bruce.
I had to have my iPad vertically in order to join, and now I had to have it horizontally to join.
Okay, so thank you very much for connecting today, and I'm sure we're going to have a real good time together today. For those of you who are watching who don't know Bruce Dickey, first thing I have to say, you should know him. And but if you don't, we have here the man himself. I know maybe he doesn't like me to say this, but he's the king of cornet. It's an instrument that later on you will have the opportunity to see if you don't know the instrument yet. And I'm going to explain how I got to know about Bruce Dickey. And it wasn't that long ago. It was back in 2016. 2015. I came back from an expedition trip through the Arctic, and when I came back, I was in a music shop in Madrid, and I saw this CD that I'm showing you here. It's breathtaking, and it was a CD. I had never heard of Bruce Dickey until that moment, and is a CD with Hanna Blazikova. She's a soprano, and I mean, I don't know why I said, okay, I've never seen that instrument. Let's see how it sounds. I bought it, and it was just fantastic. For those of you who've never heard a cornet, this is the CD you have to start with because it's fantastic. But we will speak about it later on, about breathtaking. And now, since we have the man here, Bruce, I'd like to know, because you are American, but you live in Italy presently. For many years already, you've been living in Italy.
Yeah.
And you were born in 1949 in the States. Now, let's go back in time. How is it that an American ends up in Italy and playing the cornet? So how did it all start?
It's kind of a long story. I've been in Italy for more than 40 years, so it's a major part of my life. But it started out back in the States, in Indiana. And it was in the 1950s I was growing up, and that was a period when it was a kind of golden age for the school band and orchestra in American public schools. It's now not quite so rosy, the picture, but my father had been a band director, a school music teacher, and two of my uncles were school band directors. And my mother had played, when she was in school, had played a brass instrument called the mellophone, which is not so common anymore. So it was I kind of grew up in this environment where it was natural you would play an instrument, and a band instrument perhaps. And so when I was the right age, which was 9 years old, I chose the trumpet, but actually not the trumpet. I chose the cornet. My teacher, my band director, wanted me to play the trumpet, and I said, no, I want to play the cornet, not realizing how ironic that would sound many, many years later. But so I started playing the cornet, and then not too long after that switched over to the trumpet, and so all through my elementary school, junior high school years, I played trumpet in the band, in the orchestra, and it was my favorite thing to do, and I loved to do it, and that was the thing I was best at. And this is the story of life of most musicians, I think. And then, but when it came time to go off to the university and decide what I was going to do with my life, I really, all of my music teachers had said, "Oh, it's great that you play music, and it's wonderful, and you play very wonderfully, but you don't want to be a musician. They all were frustrated because they were school music teachers or symphony orchestra players, but in small town symphony orchestra, not making much money and frustrated in their musical activities. And so they all said, no, you should go off and do something else, become a doctor, become a lawyer, or whatever people do. So I went off to the university and studied psychology and philosophy and music as an academic subject, as an intellectual thing. And all the time continuing to play the trumpet, but frustrated with it because I didn't have a very good teacher. And at a certain point in my third year in college, I decided I did, after all, want to play the trumpet. And so I started driving great distances to take lessons with a well-known teacher. And he said, yes, you can be a trumpet player. You can be a trumpet player, but you're going to have to make a huge change in your physical setup, your embouchure. And it's going to take 4 years, he said. And 4 years of playing the most mind-deadening exercises you could imagine. I would put a newspaper on my music stand and read the paper while playing these long tones for hours. And I became so frustrated with that I started playing the recorder and began, playing Baroque sonatas and things. And I fell in with a group of people at Indiana University who played all kinds of early instruments, and I started playing all kinds of reed instruments and lots of recorder, and they kept pushing me toward the cornetto, saying, this is your instrument, this is your instrument. And my trumpet teacher was saying, oh, no, that's going to be very bad for you. It took a while until I decided that what I wanted to do was be a musicologist and a recorder player. So I finished my master's degree in musicology there, and then went off to Basel, Switzerland. This is in 1974, to study recorder. I had a cornetto with me that I had played in some concerts there at Indiana University, and I sometimes wake up in the cold sweat in the middle of the night, realizing that there probably are tapes of those concerts playing cornetto in 1971. So to make a long story not too short, but shorter, in Basel, I had recorder lessons, and after about 2 months, I had an accident and I fell on my right wrist playing touch football in a house where I was living. And I had a cast put on my wrist, and I couldn't play the recorder because I couldn't reach the bottom finger hole. And it was, 2 months or 3 months, I don't remember. And I didn't know what to do with myself. And then I looked at the cornetto that I had hanging on the wall in my room, which you see
that's a cornetto, right?
Is curved, and it doesn't have the bottom finger hole. It only has 6 finger holes on the front, and a little finger is free. So I could just manage with my cast on to put the instrument on my knee and my cast on a table, and I could just play. And so for those 2 months or whatever it was, I just played cornetto badly, but with something to do. And then when they took the cast off finally, I remember it was January of my first year in Basel, suddenly it felt so nice in my hands. It was so easy to hold, because everyone who takes up the cornetto finds it to be a very difficult thing to manage, because it's quite big and the fingers are stretched. And this is a small one because it's in a high pitch, but suddenly it just felt absolutely easy. And I started practicing like crazy. And went through this period where I was taking lessons with Edward Tarr, who was the Baroque trumpet teacher in Basel, and also cornetto. But he played cornetto sort of like the older generation, with a trumpet type mouthpiece, and not really with the facility of a modern day cornetto player, say, or 17th century. But he encouraged me, and he showed me music to work on and so forth. And I remember that period so vividly, because I never experienced that ever in my life before on any instrument, that each day I could play something that the day before I couldn't play.
Wow.
It was like the skills that I had developed over the years on the trumpet and on the recorder all came together, and I was just sorting it all out, and it went incredibly fast. So that I think that was in 1975, or maybe 76. After 2 semesters of that, Edward Tarr gave me the cornetto class and said, "You should teach the cornetto here, and I will teach the trumpet." And then a year after that, or maybe 2, but I think not, Jordi Savall asked me to play some concerts with him. And then it just went quite an incredible speed. And of course, there weren't hardly any players in those days of cornetto, certainly not good ones. There were 3 of us kind of discovering it on our own at the same time. One was Jean-Pierre Canihac in Toulouse, and one was Jeremy West in London, and me in Basel. And we didn't know each other yet. And each of us working on it in our own way. And later on we met and played together, and I played quite a lot with Jean-Pierre. But yeah, that was the beginning of the cornetto. And then I took over the class in Basel in 1976, and I taught there until 2016. So it was 40 years of
very long career
of having
as
students.
a teacher.
Between at the beginning there were only a few students, but then by let's say 10 years in, there was usually a class of between 6 and 10 students every year, on varying levels. But it was a kind of rebirth, of the cornet.
Yeah. So I know teaching has been a big deal in your life. I mean, as you said, you spent 40 years teaching at Basel in the Schola Cantorum Basiliensis. So it's very, very long career as a teacher. But the question that arises now is, I'm sure your students have learned a lot from you, but what have you learned from your students generally?
Well, a lot. I would say, especially in the last 20 years that I was teaching there, when the general level of playing got much, much higher. And I mean, I never thought that it made sense for anyone in our time to teach the cornetto as maybe a violin virtuoso from a school going back centuries teaches the violin, or a singer, because no one, myself included, knows how this instrument was played or what it sounded like. We're all on a road of discovery. And so I thought that it was my role to show them what I had figured out for myself and why, and challenge them to find their own way within certain guidelines. And so I was always fascinated when students had different ideas about the sound they should make, or different ideas about how to articulate and how to ornament in the later years. And so I would always absorb what they were doing, they were figuring out for themselves. I think I saw my role as being a guide. I saw myself as being an autodidact, self-taught, and my goal was to guide their self-taught path.
Right. And when did you make the decision to move to Italy, and why?
Oh, quite early on. I lived in Basel for 7 years, and the last 5 of those I was teaching. There were some personal things involved. I got together with my wife in Basel. It wasn't my wife, we weren't married. We were together in Basel, and then I left her. And she ran off to Italy to get away from me.
I didn't know that story.
Yeah, she went to Milan, where she worked with and for Cathy Berberian, the famous soprano.
The soprano.
Yes, she acted as a kind of au pair for Cathy, and then later on as an assistant, and would accompany her on her tours when she would teach workshops, because Cathy was not in very good health. And then she began to help her learn new music because she was going blind. And in the end, in the last year or two, they did a program of music together, of American music together. So anyway, that's a kind of side story. But I decided I wanted to get back together with her, Candace, her name. And so I moved to Milan. And then we lived in Milan for 4 years, I think. I was spending a lot of time in Bologna because there's this library there that has the most important collection of 17th and 16th century prints and manuscripts. So I was going there a lot, and she was teaching in a musical theater school in Bologna, and so sort of one thing led to another. And I left Switzerland in 1981. Moved to Milan first, and then in 1985 to Bologna, and I've been there ever since. So most of my years of teaching in Basel were from Bologna, traveling up.
I understand. And out of curiosity, do you feel Italian? Do you feel American? Do you feel so?
That's a very good question and a very hard answer. I don't feel Italian. I lived in the US for 27 years. I've lived in Italy for 42, whatever it is. But of course, the first 20 years count much more than the rest. So kinds of attitudes and ways of thinking that are ingrained. But I would say let me put it this way, I feel most at home in Europe.
Right.
I don't feel Italian, but I feel very at home in Italy. I feel very welcomed in Italy. Very well rooted. My daughter was born here, and my wife teaches here, but I don't feel Italian. I will never feel like I have the kind of attitudes of an Italian toward politics or just so many things. It's something you're born with. I don't feel American. I feel comfortable when I go back, although I would have to say less and less. Over the last 10 years, things have changed, especially the last, I want to be specific, the last 4 years. And it just distresses me enormously what's going on. But that's a whole other discussion. I feel very at home here, but I don't think I'll ever feel Italian.
Right. So your daughter is Italian?
She has dual citizenship, and so does my wife. My daughter was born in Bologna and went to Italian public schools, and then went back to the States to go to the university.
Right.
And is still there in Washington, D.C., working in a nonprofit working on international development. And so she's still
She has nothing to do with music?
No.
Yeah, right. She took a bit different
She took lessons, she took piano lessons and dance lessons and all those things that kids do.
Right. And now coming back in time as well, there's a certain time when you decide to found Concerto Palatino.
Yeah.
And so tell us,
Yeah.
I mean, for those who know what it is, I mean,
Okay.
it's not necessary, but there are a lot of people who may not know Concerto Palatino.
It's an ensemble that has at its core a group of cornetti, 1 or 2 or 3 cornetti and trombones, or what some people call sackbuts, but old Renaissance Baroque trombones. But it's not a group, it's not a brass group. It's a group that has that as its core and then expands to include string players, singers, keyboard players, everything you need to play any particular sort of repertoire. And this group grew out of my work with Jordi Savall, because when I started working with him in the early 1980s, he said, could you put together a brass group to play in Hesperian 20? And so I called Jean-Pierre Canihac from Toulouse and Charles Tout from The Hague and the people I knew in Europe at the time, and we formed a usually five part brass group with 2 cornetti and 3 trombones, and did many recordings with Jordi, some of which were very important, groundbreaking, important for us as a group. Recordings of Scheidt and Gabrieli and Guami, and also one of the ones that was most important to me and still remains most important to me is the Art of Fugue, Bach, that we did, not with Concerto Palatino, but with cornetto and trombone and so forth. So that we did 10 years. We played intensively with Jordi for 10 years, often in that formation. And at the end of that period, I began to see that I didn't always agree. I wanted to do some things differently. I wanted to have more independence. I wanted to get a profile as a group. And so I broke off the connection with Jordi, not totally and not under bad feelings, but we then we launched Concerto Palatino, and then did many recordings with just our group, many recordings with Concerto Palatino as the wind component in a larger project with many conductors and other leaders and musicians. And there was then a series of what I think were our most important recordings as Concerto Palatino, which were a recording of the Gabrieli Canzoni da Suonare, which we recorded in San Petronio in Bologna in a church with 2 beautiful organs, and it was a difficult undertaking because we had to record at night, and even at night there were groups that were coming and sitting down on the steps of the church and playing drums and bongos, and it was difficult, but I'm quite happy with the result. It's now been 20 some years, and our recording of the Cavalli Vespers, I think it was a landmark, and I'm very proud of that. Recording of Christoph Strauss, who's still a very little known Austrian composer, but I think that was an important recording. And then we began a big series of co-productions with Cantus Köln in Cologne with Konrad Junghänel, and we must have made 12 or more CDs and many concerts for a period of 10 years or so.
Because I was just about to say that there are so many recording CDs of you, or with different
Yes.
groups. So I mean, they're uncountable. But for any of you who would like to know about his, to find out about his discography, if you go to Bruce Dickey's webpage, which is brucedickeyaltogether.com, you may find a discography there, and you will find a lot of CDs, but only from Bruce Dickey, not Concerto Palatino, for instance.
Right. So there is a link on my website to the Concerto Palatino website, which is concertopalatino.com.
Mhm.
And there you find a discography of Concerto Palatino, not quite up to date, but almost.
Yeah.
So I would say, I didn't mention there were also many co-productions or projects that I participated in with other conductors, Andrew Parrott, Tom Koopman, Masaki Suzuki, and the Bach Collegium in Japan, and Monica Huggett, Stefan McLeod, many things over the years. Also, Philippe Herrewege has been an important figure. I was just naming things with Concerto Palatino or with me. And then in recent years, I've begun this series of recordings for Pasakai Records in Belgium.
This is one of them.
That was the second one. The first one was called La Bella Minuta. La Bella Minuta meaning beautiful diminutions or beautiful ornamentation. And it was my idea in that CD to make a solo CD, but to record florid, highly embellished music for cornetto or for the voice, played on the cornetto, but polyphonic music with a lot of ornamentation. So part of the CD is with 3 viols and a harp, and the other part of the CD is with organ and beautiful Antoniati 16th century organ in Mantua. And so it's music where either written for the organ or for an instrumental ensemble in which I play the top part and make many ornamentations and elaborations. And then that was, I think, probably a year before or 2 years before Breathtaking. And
tell us about Breathtaking, because let me just say, for instance, that one of the things that you would be amazed if you would listen to this recording is the versatility of the cornetto and the voice of Hanna Blazikova, the mixture, the voice of this soprano and the cornetto is something you have to hear once in a lifetime at least.
It's important to know that in the 16th and 17th centuries, it was often written that the cornetto was the instrument that was best able to imitate the human voice. And all instruments in that time were supposed to imitate the human voice. That was the goal of all instrumentalists. But they always said the cornetto was the instrument that could do that best. And we don't know if that means because the sound, the timbre of the cornetto is most similar to a human voice, and they usually say a boy's voice, voice soprano, or if it's because the cornetto, its articulation is able to imitate the sound of words, or if it's the fact that cornetto players have this agility to play the kinds of ornamentation that singers did. Don't know. I think it's all of those things. But what I do know is that I always enjoyed playing with singers more than anything else. And about 7 years ago, when I met Hanna in projects with other groups and conductors, and I heard her sing, and I thought, wow, that is a voice that I can imitate better than any other. So I started thinking, how can we create a project where we put that at the center? And so I had this idea of making a program that's not just from one period, but rather from various periods. It begins in the early 17th century with sacred music at the time, and also secular music. And then there is a part with opera arias and arias from oratorios from the late 17th century, where the cornetto plays obbligato parts. And then I thought it would be really nice to have a contemporary piece, which would use those two sounds in a similar kind of way. And so I had met Caliope Tsoupaki, who's a woman who lived for a long time in the Netherlands, married to a Dutch writer. And she had written an opera for a group in Amsterdam, which was for 3 solo singers and a 17th century type orchestra with theorbos and baroque violins and viols and 3 sackbuts or 4 and cornetto and flute and it was absolutely fascinating. It was wonderful, and there were a lot of moments in this piece where the cornetto and the soprano singer had duets, and I thought, wow, this is just what I'm looking for. So I asked her, told her what I was interested in, and she just loved the idea, and she said, yes, I would love to do that, and wrote this piece called Melena Imi, which is Greek for Nigra Sum. And we fell in love with it, and so have audiences all over. Anyway, we put this together. My wife supplied the title, Breathtaking, a voice and a cornetto entwined. And we made the CD. It was very successful critically, but what was, I think, the stroke of genius was that I decided to not try to take a group, this is 7 people, not try to tour with a group of 7 people to the US or to Australia or to Japan or whatever, because it's too expensive. So we formed a group in Europe, and we formed another backup group in the US, and ultimately another one in Australia. And then now we call all of those groups together the Breathtaking Collective.
Collective, right.
That didn't exist yet at the time of the Breathtaking CD. And with that formula, we were able to travel. We've done, I think, probably almost 50 performances of this program, which for that kind of music is pretty unusual. Traveling twice to the US and Canada, and a lot around Europe, and once to Australia. And now I thought, well, people are asking, when are you coming out with your next CD? And I was thinking, well, it's not really a group. It was a project, but it has now kind of transformed into a group with this name, the Breathtaking Collective. And I put together a new program, which we recorded just before the lockdown. We finished in mid-February. It's called On the Breath of Angels, because I thought, if you look at representations of the cornetto in art, very often the cornetto player is an angel. Making music together with other angels. Often there's a singer, almost always there's a singer, sometimes a lute or a harp, organ. So I thought to take that image of angel musicians and the title On the Breath of Angels and put together a CD, which not all of the music is angel related directly in the sense that the texts are about angels, but there's always the angelic element of the cornetto and the voice playing music together. Some of the texts are about angels, and I wanted to have, again, contemporary music, and I commissioned 2 pieces for this CD. And my only conditions to the composers were that the text that they set had to have something to do with angels, and that they had to work with the cornetto and the human voice in a way that weaves them into a texture that is somehow related to the way that was done in the 17th century. So that putting the vocality of the cornetto in the forefront and say the instrumentality of the voice. You know, it's an interesting thing that after Hannah and I got to know each other and played a lot together, she admitted to me that ever since she was a young student, whenever she sang music before Bach, her goal, the goal of her sound, of her voice, was the cornetto. So she's been imitating the cornetto all the time that I've been imitating the voice, and that's, I think, why it works so seamlessly, because we're imitating each other. So anyway, we have these two contemporary pieces. One is by Ivan Moody, who is an English composer, musicologist, and Orthodox priest who lives in Lisbon and takes a lot of elements from Orthodox music into his compositional style. And the other is Julian Wachner, who's the director of music at Trinity Wall Street Church in New York City, which is the most musically active church with the most money for music. And Julian conducts the orchestra there. He also is an organist, and he's a composer and writes all sorts of music. He's written many operas and symphonies, but he also does write fairly often for old instruments. So both of them were very interested in this idea of finding this vocality in the cornetto and writing something modern, but without leaving this idea behind. And I think they both did wonderfully well. So we have these two pieces, which are, one of them is very small, like Caliope's piece, just voice, cornetto, and da gamba. And Julian's piece also has violin and organ, and so that CD. Oh, and there's one other touch on the CD. I thought it would be really nice to bind together the contemporary pieces to the 17th century pieces with a little chanson of Erik Satie, which I heard last summer sung by Barbara Hannigan in a concert, and it's just 2 minutes long. It's a very little miniature piece, gorgeous melodies. And the text is all about the angels exciting the strings of lutes with their angelic fingers and making celestial music. And I thought, wow, there couldn't be a better text for our concert. And so I said, let's dare to arrange the piano part of the Satie for theorbo.
Wow.
And Jacob Lindberg, our theorbo player, was very enthusiastic about the idea because he loves Satie, and he worked on it, and I thought it was absolutely gorgeous. So we'll see what people think, maybe.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah.
But now that you talk about the cornetto in relation to the contemporary music, because there's a lot of music written for cornetto from the 16th and 17th century, but I guess very little from the 20th century or 21st century. Do you do it on purpose? I mean, what's your aim with the cornetto as an instrument?
Yeah, my aim, I guess I could say it's twofold. I suppose, first of all, is to give me the chance to play something new in a new style, fresh, that makes me feel stimulated and to feel a part of my world and not in such a little niche. But also, I think, thinking about the culture of the cornetto, of keeping it alive and vibrant in our world. This is not the first time this has been done. It's being done more and more. I mean, there were some pieces from the 50s and 60s, but the composers didn't understand the instrument, and so they were just writing for cornetto like they were writing for a synthesizer or something, a sound producing device, and they had no idea. I think, to me, contemporary music on the cornetto is only interesting if the composer understands something about the culture of the instrument and how it was played and how it was used in the 16th, 17th centuries. They don't have to know a huge amount, but they have to listen to some things and be inspired by it, which is certainly what Caliope did. And so for me, it's only interesting in that context. There are other players who are more interested in music that, let's say, expands the technical capabilities of the instrument or goes into a new realm, as happened with the recorder and has happened with the cello and the harpsichord and other instruments as well. That's a perfectly valid thing to do. It just doesn't interest me so much as a player. It's personal taste.
Now, the question is, since you are I mean, you know the cornetto very well, have you ever thought of composing for cornetto? Who is better than you? You
well,
know the instrument perfectly.
I'm not sure that's the only thing that's required of a composer. I haven't really thought about. I mean, of course, the thought has entered my mind now and then, but I don't really think that's what I want to spend my remaining years doing. I think that I would have had to start that earlier on. I'm happy to let other people experiment with that.
Right. And let's talk about some of the projects you have. You spoke about Concerto Palatino. You also have A Nature's Secret Whispering. It's another project. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, what happened there was that Concerto Palatino was asked to play in a festival in Bruges. I can say that, I think. And you know, they wanted a large scale project, and I said, well, what's the theme of the festival? And they said, it's cosmos. And I thought, well, I don't know what we could do about cosmos, but I'll think about it. And I started looking around, and of course, very quickly the name of Johannes Kepler came up. You Google cosmology, music, 17th century, Johannes Kepler comes up. And I started reading about him. Of course, I knew a little bit about him, but not very much. And I started reading more and more. And the more I read, the more fascinated I became, because of not just his cosmology, but he was very interested in music and very involved in music and studied music when he was training in theology and astronomy and mathematics, and he studied rhetoric and music, and in a practical way, sing psalms and all sorts of things. And so he understood music from the inside, but also from this cosmic perspective. And he tried to bring the two things together. He tried to explain the structure of music in terms of planetary motion, and he made parallels between the proportions of planetary orbits, and found the same proportions in studying that he found in music. And so he made all kinds of, came up with all kinds of ideas about each planet and what song each planet sang, and the Earth sings in the Phrygian mode, because the orbit is nearly circular. So it's all based on what's called angular velocities. So the difference in speed between when the planet is at its closest point to the sun and its furthest point to the sun. But when it's furthest away, it goes fastest. So he calculated the ratios of those points for all the planets, and from that he came up with a scale or a mode that each planet sings. And he reasoned that given an infinity of time, the planets would occupy all the positions with respect to each other that are necessary for harmony. Mm-hmm. And that composers like Orlando di Lasso, whom he cites very frequently, took those same proportions and condensed them into a human time frame, 5 minutes or whatever the length of a motet. But in that 5-minute motet are contained the same principles, the same proportions that exist in the solar system. And his goal, and he said this once, I pray to God to be freed from the bonds of astronomy so that I can pursue my real interest, which is the harmony of the world. So he found this harmony in music, and he found the same harmony in the solar system. And then he wanted to find a way of bringing that harmony into the world and into the credible strife that was going on in the 17th century Germany and Austria and the Czech Republic. These were just the years right before the 30 Years' War, when everything was going to fall apart and a huge number of people would die. And he was trying to bring harmony into that somehow, and this whole thing was a part of it. So I thought, what a wonderful idea for a musical project, that we discover what's the music that Kepler knew, that he talked about, that he would have heard, that he was in his immediate environment, and play that music, and with the idea that we can maybe also bring that same harmony into our world of chaos and strife. It's kind of idealistic idea, but I thought it was a nice image. And
when will we have a CD of Kepler's music?
That CD, which is not unconnected to Breathtaking, because the group of singers is around Hanna and some of her Czech colleagues in Prague, and we recorded it in November, and I was given to believe that it would be released in June now, but now I've been told that it's going to come out in October. I'm sure that it's partly related to the Corona catastrophe.
Yeah.
And kind of thing. So it'll be out in October, and I think that the Breath of Angels one will probably come out in the spring.
Great. And you also have another project that I'd like to talk about, which is LAMP, Renaissance Academy. Not lamp like a lamp, but it comes from Lindberg Academy of Music Performance.
Yeah. And it's not
Tell us about
Lindberg. It's not Lindberg in North Germany, but Lindberg in Nova Scotia, Canada. Because there's a man there who is a friend of ours who I knew in Bologna because he played viola in the theater, the opera orchestra in Bologna for many years, and directs the Rossini Academy in Pesaro. And he went back to Canada, to this little town of Lunenburg, which is a gorgeous fishing village, which has an academy that is this building. It's on the list of protected buildings. It's from the early 20th century, I think. It sits up on a hill in this little town, and they have what they call the Lunenburg Academy of Musical Performance, and it's unique. I've never come across another thing like this, because they don't have a regular faculty and they don't have regular students. They organize a series of academies, they call them. They're a week or 10 days, all through the year, in all kinds of music. So it includes a lot of classical string quartets come, and other chamber music, piano. They've had Marta Argerich, and they've had Barbara Hannigan, and they have all kinds of big name people. They have also an academy in composition. They have jazz academies, contemporary music, and about 3-4 years ago, this Bert Vaten, who's the director, wanted to do an early music academy. He asked me my ideas, and so we did one, a kind of tentative one. We had almost no students, but it has started to. We do now a 2-year. We try to do 2-year, and they always have a very specific theme, topic. Small, because the way the thing works financially, he doesn't want to have more than 4 students per teacher, and we usually have 3, 4, or 5 teachers, so it can be anywhere from 12 to 20 students. We spend a week or 10 days very intensely working on a repertoire. We've done all sorts of things, but not Baroque music. It's all Renaissance, early Baroque, Renaissance, the period of the cornetto, basically. Our next one will be based on the musical world of Michael Praetorius, this German theoretician and composer, prolific composer of the first half of the 17th century. There's going to be a medieval academy with Catalina Vicens, who's a keyboard player, brilliant keyboard player. And we have other things up our sleeve, but we try to do 2 a year. We've been kind of blocked by the COVID situation, of course, and so we were to be having our Praetorius Academy right now, and we've had to put that off until next summer. and we're trying to organize a digital 3-day digital component of that course for sometime in the spring, and then that's still under discussion.
One question: why do you think the music of Pretorius is not so recorded? I can't find music.
I always say that Pretorius somehow in
you said he's very prolific.
He's become the Christmas composer. There are so many groups that only play Pretorius at Christmas time, and then they do their Pretorius Christmas program, often with the same pieces. I don't know. I'm not quite sure why. The music is actually wonderful, and there's a huge variety of different kinds of instrumentations, and small and large and everything, and it's also, of course, fascinating what he has to say. He's extremely verbose, so it taxes your German knowledge if you have any. But he has all kinds of really, really interesting things to say. So I'm hoping to use, again, these lamp academies for me, almost even more than in Basel, have been an opportunity for me to learn about each of these topics that we present, because we have to prepare very thoroughly on each of these topics, and I'm looking forward to jumping with both feet into Pretorius.
One of the viewers has just written a question for you.
Yeah.
Jenny Benoit Pinot, how do you explain actual interest to early music? I think it's current interest to early music. How do you explain current interest to early music? That's the question. Jenny Benoit Pinot.
Okay. I don't know. I can speak to my own interest, which I think is very similar to other people, my colleagues, that we discovered first the instruments. I discovered the cornetto, and then discovered that, oh my God, this is an instrument with a whole repertoire that no one knows anything about. It was just like, and then it turns out to be music that I absolutely love. So it's about the instrument for me, and it may not be that way for everyone. It's about discovering an instrument that is, I never felt like the trumpet was I never felt a connection with it, really. I thought, oh, I like the music, but until I discovered the cornetto, where I really felt like this instrument is an extension of me. And in addition, there's this huge repertoire of music. Now, for other people, I think it's discovering, if they play violin or cello or other instruments that have modern forms, they discover that there's another whole palette of colors that are not used, that existed with the older instruments, that are just fascinating. And I think they fall in love with that whole different palette and whole different way of approaching music, the way of approaching music as a language, as speech, as voice, as singing. It's all much more, I don't know, it's such a rich world once you get into it. That doesn't explain why people come to it as listeners. I can't speak to that so much, why I come to it as a player and why my colleagues do. But I think we've all felt it as a huge liberation after the experience that most of us had playing modern orchestral instruments or
Right. And this
not that I wouldn't like to go back and be able to play Mahler and these things, so maybe that's Satie, but I'm happy in my world.
I have a fixed section in this series of A Coffee With. One is about books, and the question is, what kind of books do you read, or what book would you recommend? Not necessarily about music, but if you would meet someone and say, okay, I think this is it's worth a reading.
Wow, that's I mean, I read a lot of contemporary fiction novels, usually American, but not always. And I'm hard pressed to suggest any one of those. And I'm trying to think something a little more in the direction of what we do. I mean, there are some brilliant books by a colleague of mine who died a number of years ago, Bruce Haynes, who wrote a book called The End of Early Music, which is a very stimulating book. Of course, it has the double meaning, the end as the goal and the end as la fine.
Sure.
And,
I'll take note of it.
yeah, it's worth reading.
The End of Early Music.
End of Early Music. It's very thought-provoking.
Right. And okay. And another section is about recordings. Well, of course, the one I recommend for everybody who's watching us is this one. This is a must listening.
Yeah, the other way around.
But now I'm asking you, if you again a recording or that you would say this is something you have to listen once in a lifetime, and why?
Of my own, or
no, not something that you would say. Imagine you meet someone you don't know, and they say, "Okay, I think you should." Or so let's speak about people who usually don't listen to classical music, or are not in the world of classical music.
Well,
you would say, "Okay."
I would. I would have to say Bach, and I would have to say something, probably one of the Philipp Herreweghe Bach recordings, or Masaaki Suzuki. I mean, they've both recorded many cantatas. I think that the Philipp's recording of the Bach motets is absolutely brilliant.
By the way,
I could also say, and I say this, I did play on the record. It's not why I'm suggesting it, but because it was 1985, I think. You know, the Monteverdi Vespers has become a major.
I know that one.
I've recorded many times, but the recording I would suggest above all others is the one that Andrew Parrott made in 1985, I think it was. I played on it early in my career, but I've gone back and listened to it in recent years, and I think, wow, it's a stunning sound, yeah.
Right. By the way, there's the person who asked the previous question. She said, "Thank you. I think also that is a question of duration of phrases, talking about early music, a kind of respiration we do not have sufficiently in our everyday life." This is the point of view of an amateur. So for her, I'm talking about early music. That is like, I understand that makes you breathe.
I do think that people maybe have an idea about the cornetto that is not true. I mean, if you look, this is the mouthpiece of the cornetto. I can find the camera.
Yeah.
It's very, very small, and the opening in it is even much, much smaller. And so, the amount of air that I use in playing a phrase is absolutely minimal. There's a famous phrase in a treatise of Mersenne who says, Monsieur Quiclet could play 100 bars in one breath on the cornetto. And I don't doubt that, because the problem is you use the air so slowly. You can play 100 bars, assuming it's not in a very slow tempo. You can play 100 bars. The problems arise with bars 101 and 102, because you have all this air retained, and you afterwards you have to pass. So it's a bit like an oboist, but it's worse. So we don't take much air in, and we don't blow much air out. And that's one of the hardest things to learn when you play the cornetto, that you hardly inhale. So it is not sort of like a trombone player or a tuba player in the symphony orchestra where you're taking in huge volumes of air. It's working with tiny little bits of air.
And now, to finish the section that I love the most is, and I have to say that I took this from Bertrand Russell many years ago. I think it was in the 50s, 40s, I can't remember now. He was asked a question, and if he would have a message for someone, I think it was in 1,000 years' time. So I'm not going to go so far, but imagine someone from 100 years from now is watching us and is listening to you. What kind of message would you have for that person?
Wow, that's challenging.
Especially coming from someone who is dedicated his whole life to let people say this is breathtaking.
Well, I mean, I think I wouldn't in any way say to them they should learn music or whatever music might be like in 100 years. But in a way, find something that takes your breath away, whether it's literature or architecture or food, or this idea of breathtaking is not bad. Something that makes you feel beyond yourself, something that's beyond yourself, and I think that's all I can.
So, Bruce, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. There are lots of things I would have liked to talk about, but we have a limited time. And but before we finish, I'd like you to say, well, something that you would like to say, because this coffee is for you, and I had the pleasure. As I said to you previous to our conversation, I would have never thought I could be speaking to you like this, especially after, I mean, you're my hero, so it's like having Superman.
If I'm speaking to a world of people who listen to music, and of all different kinds, I think that's great. I also listen to all kinds of music, but don't think, if you think about classical music, don't think about just Brahms, Beethoven, Mendelssohn, even Bach, but explore that whole 17th century world, which is so full of
amazing.
And not only the 17th, but also the 16th century. But I think 17th century maybe is more approachable by some people, though 16th century polyphony is the perfect thing to listen to in lockdown.
So, as I said, thank you very, very much, and I'm really looking forward to listen to that music of the stars of Johannes Kepler music, because it's I'm sure you did a really good job. I have no doubts about it. That's why I'm looking forward to it.
I'm very happy and very proud about it.
So thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, Michael. Bye-bye.